there was a story being sold around you can secure what you're building without slowing down, and this whole kind of idea of shifting security left. But what it actually turned out to be in practice was a lot of extra work for security teams. With Nullify, we saw a really big opportunity using agents with the right context and the right memory to automate a lot of that work end to end. We're just betting on the models infinitely improving at performing security tasks and reasoning about security. Instead, where we're continuing to invest and where we've always invested is data, context, memory, and tooling. Perhaps before they may have hired 5 or 10 security engineers, but now they'd rather hire 2 kind of staff level generalist security engineers and arm them with all these AI employees and just cost multiply them that way. So it's a bit of a different model.
Thanks for joining Terminal Value. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Shan Kulkarni, co-founder and CEO of Nullify, a product security company building AI agents for application security. Nullify recently raised $12.5 million in a seed round led by Sin Ventures with participation from Black Nova, bringing total funding to nearly $17 million. In this episode, we talk about how AI is changing application security, why context matters, what end-to-end security workflows look like, and how pricing changes when software starts replacing more of the real work. Now, on to the interview. Shan, thank you so much for joining. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So, Shan, before we jump into Nullify, I'd love to give the audience a little bit of just a briefing on the application security industry. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with the umbrella term cybersecurity, but could you walk through, one, what is application security? And 2 is, what are the tools and kind of day-to-day for individuals in that space?
Absolutely. So application security is probably a 15 or 20-year-old category now in cybersecurity. It's been around as long as companies have been building software, and it's all about securing the software that you build. So if you think about from 2010, 2015 onwards, as companies started to ship software faster, ship it onto the cloud, and the bar for innovation really got democratized, and anyone started being able to ship software. Companies started realizing that if they weren't taking care with how they were shipping that software and making it secure, then they were exposing themselves to lots of cybersecurity risk. So there was a few high kind of profile data breaches in like the late 2010s that stemmed from software that was built insecurely, and that resulted in security vulnerabilities that allowed attackers to exfiltrate lots and lots of data, and attacks that ended up in data breaches. So you can think of application security as the part of the security program or cybersecurity program in a company that's really focused on making sure the software that they build isn't prone to vulnerabilities and exploits that attackers can use to, cause a data breach in the company.
Okay, I see. And so could you walk me through today for a company that's buying application security software, maybe Snyk is kind of like the prototypical legacy example. What is their workflow kind of day to day? And then I think that'll be a good segue into how's Nullify really redefining what that workflow should be?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, Snyk has been around not the longest, but it's definitely the largest kind of incumbent in this category. I think what we saw with that kind of cycle of this category was there was a story being sold around, you can secure what you're building without slowing down, and this whole kind of idea of shifting security left. But what it actually turned out to be in practice was just like a lot of extra work for security teams. So, you would run these tools like Snyk, and they would produce lots and lots of findings or alerts and tell you like where there was potential vulnerabilities in your software. But at the end of the day, security teams still had to manually triage these alerts and these vulnerabilities. And so there was a lot of toil, a lot of manual effort still required from them in order to kind of stay on top of the vulnerability backlog. Questions like what vulnerabilities need to be fixed, who should fix them, when they should be fixed, how they should be fixed. They all really remained unanswered. But with Nullify and kind of the way we're trying to reshape those workflows, so you'd usually have the tools producing the alerts. The security team would have to manually triage them, manually assign them, generate fixes, follow up on the fixes, close all the tickets out. With Nullify, we saw a really big opportunity using agents with the right context and the right memory to automate a lot of that work end to end. And what inspired us, or what kind of shaped our hypothesis was seeing how teams like Amazon, for example, so really, really large engineering companies, how did they scale application security when they had this problem they didn't have, or they rather they did have lots and lots of security engineers to distribute. So they have this thing called security guardians, where they literally embed security engineers into every developer team. So obviously, if you're not Amazon, it's very difficult to retain and hire those sorts of that amount of security talent. And so with Nullify, we saw a really large opportunity to democratize that framework or that approach by productizing security guardians with AI agents. So can we give every company an AI security team? So even if they don't have the ability to hire application security humans, they can hire application security AI employees instead, so to speak, with Nullify.
When Nullify is embedded into an organization, what is the difference in workflow for an engineering team? Because it sounds like not only are you in the identification, but you're also remediating issues, automating them in a way that's unlike what's out there today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on the kind of first part of the workflow, it's all concerned with the bugs that you're finding. Are you finding exploitable vulnerabilities? Are those vulnerabilities impactful to your business? And a lot of that work, a lot of that triage work is very manual, right? So security teams, once they get those alerts, they have to figure out where is this, what is this vulnerability talking about? Is it actually exploitable? Is it reachable? If it was exploited, would it lead to a loss to my business? Is it impactful? Then once they've done all that triage, which can be very, very arduous, they have to go and look at what the application is deployed. They have to go look at who owns that workload, who's the right person to fix it, obviously how it should be fixed. They may not have all the context of the application, so they have to go and look in the code, look at the endpoints, and make sure that whatever fix they propose isn't going to break something else in the code. So there's like a lot of manual steps in this workflow or in this value chain of going from a potentially identified vulnerability all the way to fixing it, and that actually involves a lot of complexity in interfacing with the engineering organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's actually where we saw most of the friction. Was like you have these 3 or 4 application security engineers at most. Most of the time, you have one person responsible for application security and a whole team of maybe 3 or 4 in security engineering, and they're meant to run all these scans, find all these vulnerabilities, triage them, and they have this arduous task of interfacing with an engineering org of like 400, 500 people.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to go and negotiate with engineering managers, to your point, that don't really all the time care about security, to say like, hey, we really need to fix these security vulnerabilities. And to be fair, on the engineering teams, like they may have a big product release coming up, they may have different priorities, so it's not really a priority for them. And that's a huge part of the workflow, is that back and forth. And then once the fixes have been opened up, there's a lot of complexity around that orchestration. So maybe you open up a fix in GitHub, but then the developer doesn't review it in time. The fix goes stale, the branch goes stale, and then sometimes the fix fixes the vulnerability, but then it breaks some other part of the code. There's just a lot of operational complexity involved in that. And so I think with Nullify, the question we ask ourselves the most is like, how do human security engineers make decisions? And how can we embed that decision making and that reasoning into what we call Vault, which is our long-term memory, an ontology that we build in the customer's environment, so that all of our agents making decisions can customize those decisions and determinations specific to them. So, it should understand that, okay, maybe this is, in the case of MasterCard, let's say, like MasterCard is a payments provider company, has all these workloads that are in scope for PCI DSS. This is the business context that's relevant to the AI as it's triaging the vulnerability. So it's going to be different for every single customer, for every single organization. And by doing that, it's actually able to not just match, but also, I think, outperform the triaging abilities of human security engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Because with Vault, it can kind of get that instant context loaded into any single task that it's performing. Whereas a human would have to go and say, like, oh, why is this workload important to MasterCard? Who owns it? Is it really, does it need to be fixed now? Is the vulnerability exploitable? So when we add Nullify into the mix, they're removing all of that manual work, and I would say they're removing 60 to 70% of the FTE hours that they're performing these tasks on. So you can actually give back that time to security teams, and I think they can focus on performing more higher leverage and higher impact work for their security program. So threat modeling, design reviews, things that AI isn't good at just yet. But I would say that Nullify kind of automates 50, 60% of what they do today.
Yeah, that's incredible. One point that you hit on too, you were very fair to the engineering department, and it's true, which is they have their own priorities, and coming from kind of the product business side of an organization, a lot of the pressure put on engineering teams is, hey, go ship features, go add revenue, and unless you have a security voice, that becomes, particularly in medium-sized, smaller organizations, that becomes less of an emphasis until there's an issue, and then all of a sudden it's, hey, we got to go fix this stuff. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on Vault. A lot of companies I've been talking to in the applied AI space talk about the criticality of having that ontology layer. And a lot of them speak about having this forward deployed engineering concept as well. And so I want to get your thoughts on two pieces. One is, within Vault, how do you ensure, or what are the sources that are necessary, and the prioritization, modeling of those sources to ensure that what you're building builds trust within the organization, the customer? And how important is this concept of a forward deployed engineer or deployment in your customer instances today?
Yeah, it's great questions. And I think that's kind of the model of adopting these kind of agentic workloads is, the advantage of it is through a memory construct like Vault, whether you're building agents for security teams or agents for sales teams or whatever it might be, you're able to generalize a solution for whatever tasks your agents are performing, but making it specific to each customer environment. Um, and so for us, like Vault is so critical to delivering the full benefit, right? And so what we need from our customers is obviously cloud context. So that allows our agents to figure out where are workloads being deployed, are they reachable from the internet? If we're investigating vulnerabilities, how are assets connected? Um, things like obviously the customer's code base, ticketing, messaging, all the different places a human security engineer would do work. Nullify also needs access, right, in order to do work there as well. But where we, I think, saw the biggest breakthrough is unstructured documentation. So if you look at kind of that previous era of security tooling, could be in application security, could be in vulnerability management, could be anywhere. You had all these companies that were saying we have custom prioritization risk scoring system or risk-based prioritization system, and they would score these vulnerabilities with this custom risk score and say, this is, we as Snyk or CrowdStrike or whoever think like this particular vulnerability is of this kind of risk to your business. But what we would see is that the human security team would take that vulnerability, would take that risk, and they would actually have to manually score it against their own risk framework, their own risk model. Now, what is that risk framework and that risk model? It's generally a document in Confluence, actually. It's a document that defines which bug classes are important to the business, which exploit parts, which workloads define what kind of risks for the business. So we found that if we ingest that into Vault and we combine it with the cloud context, the repo context, all the other pieces of data we're able to connect and map, then the agents can then really understand that and even reference it in their investigations. So it's very, very powerful. And if you combine that with the forward deployed engineering model, we're able to make sure that customers are successful when they're able to get back their time on tasks that they were previously doing manually. But I think that kind of FTE workflow around like doing things manually in the customer environment is something that we're kind of seeing, at least at Nullify, reduced a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to make that onboarding process like as self-serve as possible. Like if you give us these things, we will do the rest to kind of onboard it and populate Vault with the context that the agents need. You just kind of have to sit back and connect the data that we needed to start. But yeah, we definitely did see a lot of success. For example, when we first started, some of the triages weren't that accurate or some of the fixes weren't that accurate. The forward deployed engineering model helped us, get better at, telling the AI and improving the AI at, doing these tasks. But it's come a long way. And I think where we've gotten to now is the tools that we built for our forward deployed engineering teams to use to do this work. What we've actually done is we've actually given it to Nullify, given it to the AI internally. So now instead of the humans using these internal tools we've built to do FDE, Nullify kind of does FDE, right? So it's like the AI is kind of doing work on itself, which I think is very powerful. And it's what we're seeing with a lot of the AI labs. I know at Anthropic, they use Claude to build Claude, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of where we're heading, and it's really exciting to see. And pretty cool to see how well it's working.
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's a key financial question too, which is if you're Palantir and your contracts are millions of dollars, you can afford to have a large team that's with a customer, frankly, embedded for a long time. If your contracts are normal software contracts or agentic contracts, over time you want to be able to see some level of efficiency. So I love how you're thinking about this. Um, you hit on this point that 60-70% of the use cases are fairly automated. Where do you feel what are the tasks that you feel like, okay, AI is just not there yet? And how much of that do you feel is I need better models underneath my system? And how much of that is really just you seeing more instances and being able to have a training overlay yourself?
Yeah, I think the tasks that humans are probably still better at: threat modeling, design reviews, architecture stuff, and setting design patterns for the company, like from a security perspective, mapping risk and compliance requirements. A lot more strategic
Mm-hmm.
things like interfacing with the different stakeholders in the business and translating the business requirements to the security strategy. I think that's where a lot of security teams should focus. Um, and I think where we can get into some of those, at least over time, is really just understanding like what context goes into those workflows and how we can piece them together. I think overall, like it would still be good for a lot of them to remain like human focused or human performed, like definitely human in the loop at the very
Mm-hmm.
least. Whereas the stuff we're doing now, like the triage, the exploitability, the exploit validation, the remediation, the assignment of those remediations to the right developers, the escalation of those fixes in Slack or in Jira, a lot of that I think is actually much better performed by the AI than the humans. Um, but yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. Like a lot of security leaders that I talk to, like they actually don't think that a lot of the headcount in their security program is that good value comparing it to what they're seeing the AI is able to do,
Mm.
right? So perhaps before they may have hired like 5 or 10 security engineers, one doing email security, one doing corporate security, one doing application security. But now, like they'd rather hire two kind of staff level generalist security engineers and kind of arm them with all these AI employees and just kind of force multiply them that way. So it's a bit of a different model, I would say. But in terms of technology, like the models are we're just kind of betting on the models infinitely improving at performing security tasks and reasoning about security. So instead, where we're continuing to invest and where we've always invested is data, context, memory, and tooling, and that's very important. I think that's been very important to maintaining our advantage, maintaining our the benefit we're able to create in the product. Because early in the cycle of AI and application security, we saw a lot of companies kind of fall into this tar pit of like, let's say, fine tuning for like one very specific task, like fine tuning a model for like vulnerability fixing or vulnerability triaging, which is something we almost got pushed into doing ourselves, right? Just with all the hype. But we knew that these things were going to get commoditized by how good the models were going to be. And so we were like, in a world where they're so good, they should have access to all these different environments. They should have long-term memory. They should have the ability to run any different tool in any different situation. And that's kind of where we invested in tool use for the
Mm-hmm.
AI to then traverse, cloud assets, to investigate code, to message people in Slack, as well as the long-term memory we already talked about with Vault. So I think for us, like it's what's going to be really interesting is once Anthropic or these AI labs, they start to release interfaces or they start to release mechanisms for companies like us to do reinforcement learning per customer. So that's something we'd really be excited to do is like, with Vault, we ideally want to do RL per customer on just their Vault tenant, not across customers, but that way we can, continue to increase their data investment. We have a concept in Vault called memories. So over time, as context changes in your environment, those memories get updated and decisions, maybe vulnerabilities get retriaged. We want the ability through the model providers to kind of like tune the weights of the model specific to each customer in Vault. So some sort of abstraction to do that would be great. But we'll see I know there's a lot of interesting things happening there as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's incredible how individualized customer instances are going to get in this applied AI space. Like I know for us at Center, we had to deal a lot more with we had to worry a lot more about leaks of credit card information and things like payments information that some company that's in a more horizontal SaaS space and not payments related isn't going to have to worry about. And so it really is mind blowing how fast these things are moving. Um, so, Shan, as you think about your customer base, where are you finding the most reciprocation, the most value being unlocked
Yep.
customer wise? Are there certain segments that you're finding where you need a large enough customer instance to find value, or is it smaller customers who are like, hey, I don't have time for this today, but I know what I need to be worrying about this?
Yeah, I think companies with at least 50 developers is a good start. That way, like they're at that point in their security program and their journey that they want to invest in application security, but they have something like generally speaking at that scale of engineering team, they probably don't have that big of a security team. So they're not able to really get value from like the security tools that they're procuring. And so I think with Nullify, like a good heuristic for, finding a good fit with customers is like, is their ratio of software engineers to security engineers really out of whack?
Mm.
Because that tells us then like there's an opportunity for us to prove a lot of value to say like, you don't have to stack your security team with like 4 or 5 AppSec engineers. With Nullify, you can get it to perform a lot of the work that you would hire them to do anyways. So we see at that kind of level, companies start to understand, okay, we're running these scanners, whether it's Snyk or GitHub Advanced Security or something else, but we're not able to like realize value from them because we don't have the human headcount to operationalize the work, right? Triage the alerts from the scanners, validate the exploits, assign them to the right developers, follow up on them, fix them, close them out, do all that reporting. Um, I think as you move up market, like as the companies get larger and larger, it can be industry agnostic, but obviously if they're health, FSI, retail, media, um, they're starting to price application security a bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before it was mainly SaaS companies, but if you're a streaming company and there's a cross-tenant abuse or privilege escalation vulnerability that leads to an attacker perhaps like taking down the stream, and that's or producing a denial of service attack, like that's obviously going to result in significant loss and significant impact to your business, right? So I think they're starting to price, and now they know that AI can find these sorts of business logic flaws, these sorts of vulnerabilities that could lead to those exploit scenarios. They're really focusing on AppSec more, and they're starting to price that risk higher.
Mm-hmm.
So as we move up market, like they have hundreds of developers, thousands of developers, the vulnerability backlog is just completely out of control. And so where we see a fit in those environments is with what we have called campaigns. So campaigns is all about enabling Nullify to just kind of do all that work for you and mirroring the security objectives in your program with your remediation goals. So companies are creating campaigns to kind of fix a subset of their backlog, or let Nullify fix a subset of their backlog. Maybe if there's a certain audit coming up or if there's a certain bug class they want eradicated in their backlog, they're using campaigns to do that. So it's really acting as an enabler to them going on that journey. And yeah, the larger the company, the more kind of value they're able to notice or to realize, I should say.
I see. One of the concepts we had as we were going through deployment and really getting customers to trust us was we would, for a couple of months, we would essentially help them close their books. And our equivalent of a forward deployed engineer, we just called them a deployment manager. They would help set up their instance. And then the big test was, hey, at the end of the month, when you're reconciling all your credit card transactions on top of Center and you're using our software to close your books, are you able to do that successfully? And usually after 1, maybe 2 months of doing that, that's when, one, the customer trusted us deeply, and two, is we were able to hand them off to a lower cost account management uh, uh, team. And so for you, what is that moment for you at Nullify?
Very similar. What it is with Nullify is they're creating campaigns to fix vulnerabilities. The AI is going out there creating fix pull requests in GitHub, following up in Slack, closing out tickets in Jira. And once the campaigns are finishing, we have a thing called a campaigns lookback.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lookback, you were able to actually show the customer like this is how many vulnerabilities campaigns has fixed for you. These and most importantly, these are how many vulnerabilities were fixed within your SLAs that you've configured within the platform. These are the teams that are fixing the most vulnerabilities, and the metric that we use to really measure the quality of this kind of use case is what we call the merge ready rate of those vulnerability fixes, right? So it's not really useful if we're opening up all these fixes in GitHub, but the developers are having to kind of constantly like having to go back and forth with Nullify to refactor those fixes, right? Like there's a lot of manual effort required in still getting that fix merged. So if, ideally, we want our merge ready rate to be as close to 100%. It's about 90% across the board for all our
Man.
customers, right? So it means that 9 out of 10 times a developer is reviewing the fix from Nullify, sorry, not having to review the fix from Nullify, and they're able to just merge in the fix. So that's kind of that happy path and that light bulb moment is they're giving us all the stuff with Vault, to populate and onboard into Vault. It's building this long-term memory. It's using that memory to discover and triage and validate impactful exploits. And the first thing they're actually met with is a default campaign. So now with the context we have in Vault, Nullify is actually opinionated about what it thinks you should fix first.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll create a campaign for it. They start the campaign, and month in, month out, or week in, week out, they're starting to see that flow rate of the vulnerability fixes go up, and ideally the merge ready rate of those fixes be as close to 100% as possible. And then at that point, they're kind of at that journey where they can just keep self-serving campaigns, and they kind of know that the AI is just always on doing its thing in the background, and they don't really need to do anything else.
That's incredible. That's got to be a cool moment for the customer when they see how automated the process is relative to like, hey, here are 1,000 security alerts. Good luck with their previous stack. So another thing I ask a lot of founders in the space is just how they think about pricing. There's obviously this big movement to move away from traditional SaaS pricing and make sure that you can protect your gross margin structure by charging against the utilization at the model layer. But I'd love to get your thoughts on how you think about pricing, and more importantly, what do your customers respond, or how do they
Yeah,
respond?
pricing is very important, I think, for two reasons. So for us, obviously, our cost base being the models, like we needed a pricing model that reflected that. Some of these triages or these investigations we perform and exploits we validate, they might cost a few dollars per exploit, right? Because the AI is maybe having to look in your AWS account, it's having to look in Vault of your documents, it's having to maybe it might ask a human in Slack, it might do a lot of different things, and so these are very deep triages, deep investigations. It might cost a few dollars, but more than that, we wanted to co-develop an ROI model with our customers that enables us to actually hold ourselves accountable to them. And that's really important because if you see the metrics for Nullify on the website, it's the same ones that are in the product, and it's the same ones that the customer use to measure the value that Nullify is creating. So in other words, like how would you pay for a human employee? You should pay Nullify the same way. You should measure Nullify's performance the same way as well, right? Like so with Nullify, it's not per seat based pricing anymore. You buy one Nullify AI security engineer, and then depending on the size of your environment, the work that Nullify needs to perform, you might have to buy multiple units of it. And then you actually just measure and you see how many vulnerabilities and exploits has Nullify validated and discovered and validated. How has Nullify saved triaging false positive vulnerabilities? How many vulnerabilities has Nullify fixed with campaigns? What's the merge ready rate of those fixes? And so you're kind of shaping in the minds of the customer as well the value they're getting from the product versus with a per seat model. You sell something as a per seat product. It's a tool. It's not an AI employee. It's a tool that might be an AI powered tool, but it's a tool that humans are using to perform knowledge work, right? But I think with Nullify, what we're seeing in a lot of different categories, whether it's like Harvey and like the legal industry, or Devin in software engineering, or Decagon customer success, we're seeing a move now towards previously SaaS was being used by humans to perform knowledge work, make them more productive at performing knowledge work, but now that same SaaS, call it like agentic labor or agentic capital, is performing that knowledge work instead. So we're enabling humans to instead move towards performing intuition work. And so as a result, we should price the SaaS, or in our case, price our agents as if they were human headcount. And it goes both ways. The customer should measure the value and the output of those AI headcount as outcomes that a human security team would create. That way, they also get to hold us accountable.
Man, that's fascinating. So this is the first discussion I've had so far where you truly are pricing on a headcount basis as opposed to some sort of more clear utilization basis. How well, two questions in here. One is, what is the customer's response to that pricing model? And then two is, Are you today? I saw on your website it's I believe 6,000 per month for the package. Are you saying that a customer could buy multiple instances of that 6,000 per month? And how do you kind of measure that?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think in the end it gets right sized anyways to the size of the customer's vulnerability backlog,
Mm,
number of workloads, number of repos. I think that's kind of the base tier that we had just in place. That that one instance of that or one unit of that is probably sufficient. But if you think about a company with hundreds of developers, the throughput of the software and the bugs that we might be discovering, throughput of that is just going to be a lot higher. And so naturally, you would want, we would want our cost base to be covered. But included in that instance or that one unit of Nullify is a certain amount of credits, and the credits get consumed every time Nullify investigates a vulnerability, opens up a fix, follows up with the developer, and anywhere it's doing work, it's consuming credits. And so I think pricing it that way is, I would say, a hybrid between pure AI pricing and pure outcomes based pricing, right? If it's pure consumption, it's very difficult to predict. With outcomes based, you run into other problems where you might disincentivize the customer from using the product, right? Like
yeah.
if we're saying we're going to charge you $1 for every vulnerability you fix using campaigns, they may not want to use campaigns, right? So their bill is less. So I think having it the way we have it is it allows us to negotiate an upfront fixed price with the customer, and they get to say, look, we're going to buy two, but then we want discounts, and then we want this many exploits included, but we're fine with getting less number of credits to perform remediation because we don't have that many findings. So it allows them to kind of like right size that agent to their deployment, to their environment.
That's really interesting. So really, the way I could look at this is it really is a similar underpinning as to a lot of what the other AI companies are doing. But I think the interesting part here, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is you're framing this much more directly as, hey, you are going to be able to save on future headcount because you're pricing it essentially as what you price for the headcount of an engineer. So does that make it an easier comp or easier to digest for the buyer? It's like, oh, okay, I'm paying 6 grand a month for this, but I'm saving X on future hires here.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's another way that it helps a lot with customers is like they get to map the time savings. They also get to kind of understand what a full time equivalent headcount would cost and then kind of break down costs that way. I think a lot of, and the reason why I think that's useful for them is like a lot of what CISOs are having to do today is like they've really focused on reporting up, right? Reporting up, managing up to the board, right? Oftentimes they're reporting directly to the board, sometimes the CRO or the COO. And so they have a different kind of challenge today, which is like to really fight for their seat at that table, fight for their budget. Security has always been like a risk reduction mechanism in the company, right? So what this enables them to do is like arms them with like a different conversation. Like we're not only able to significantly reduce risk in like a really important, significant part of the attack surface, but it's also enabling us, this model and this way that this approach of doing it is enabling us to kind of like stay really, really productive, stay lean, reduce the amount of overhead when it comes to operating expenses. And obviously the board loves that, and the shareholders love that as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like every company wants to be able to tell their shareholders that they're adopting AI at a rate that allows them to, you know, um, more effectively deploy capital into headcount, right? Like I think a lot of people, they get scared when they hear this. They think, oh, AI is taking our jobs, but I think it's actually a useful conversation for the CISO to go like, look, this is what we were previously spending on these 2 or 3 headcount, and a lot of the time those headcount are very burned out. They're very burnt out because they don't have the time to do all the work, um, and so they're expensive and they're burnt out. So the CISO is able to say we're able to map this cost to AI spend. It's predictable. We can measure it based off of outcomes. It's performing at a much higher rate, much better rate. Because remember, we're not just replacing the headcount, we're also replacing the tools that the headcount would have to operate,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're operating these 4 or 5 different scanners and triage tools, fixes, and then obviously there's a lot of labor on the other side of operationalizing it. And sometimes, a lot of the time, the CISO is very happy because they often are procuring like services companies. So, they'll have like Infosys or TCS or these kind of large GSIs or service MSSPs or service providers, and they will use Snyk or check marks or manage. It's like manage Snyk or manage check marks to kind of do all this triage manually. So they're able to tell a story of better dollar utilization, headcount utilization, and the headcount that they are hiring, they're able to deploy that in much more effective ways, I think. And the board's happy and everyone's happy.
Yeah, you have an up close view to this, and so I'm really curious to get your opinion on how do you see employment in the security space evolving over time. And well, I'll leave it there. I'll ask you a follow up question in a second.
Yeah. No, like I said, I think again, if we think about every enterprise everywhere is really redefining like how do they define value, how do they define value creation, and that's because of what we're seeing with agents and with AI capital or AI labor, right? So if you think about what that looks like in the security org, well, I think the security humans, like the way that they're going to create value is going to be different now. Um, and I think a big part of it is going to be like, yeah, how they translate the requirements of the business, the security priorities, how they interface with different stakeholders. I think security is going to be a bit much bigger part of the probably the sales process, right? Maybe for consumer products, it might be a lot bigger part of the marketing story. If you're asking me as a consumer, if I have the choice of like three or four telcos or banks, I would probably want the one with the least data breaches, right? So I think their function in the business is just going to change, and I think the skills and that they'll need will change as well. Um, so I don't know if it's going to be like a reduction in the need for them or anything, but I think there'll be definitely be a reduction in the need for certain tasks that they perform.
Yeah.
And in fact, we weren't even the first to kind of apply this approach with application security. I think what we saw 2 years ago was an explosion in the space for a lot of the kind of labor and security operation centers for alert triage. And so in the SOC space, we saw a lot of AI SOC analysts crop up, and that was kind of very compelling and for good reason, right? Like the rate at which the machines were able to process the alerts and accuracy at which the machines were able to triage them, and the cost reduction you saw was just kind of unprecedented. So we're going to see a flow and affect a lot of different parts of that in security program, but it's just going to change how the security teams create value for the business and how they work with the other parts of the business, I think.
I'd love to get your thoughts on, one just to give you context. So at Center, everyone used to ask us, "Hey, why doesn't Concur just go build? Concur is a big expense management platform. Why don't they just go build a card and go do what you guys are doing?" How do you think about that when investors or customers ask you, like, why don't I just go with a Snyk or an incumbent here?
Yeah, I think the way I think about this is so Nico Pop, a good friend of mine, used to be the Tenable CPO. Before that, he was a CPO at Symantec. And this is actually something Nico told me. He said that every kind of like generational security company has this concept of like a platform unifying principle, or like a unification technology construct that enables unification across use cases and across customers as well. So if you think about Wiz, maybe let's say it was like the knowledge graph. I think for Nullify, it's definitely Vault and a lot of the architecture we have around these agents passing information and working together. Um, but what that means is that creates a mechanism in the product which creates like this compounding effect, right? And I think that compounding effect is really really important for us to kind of say, look, obviously you could roll anything on your own these days. You could use Claude to build anything in your own environment, but what we've done, I think, and maybe Rippling kind of did it first, but I think if Rippling was built today, it would be even more valuable just because of like what you're able to do with agents. But a system of agents working together and over time, like learning and understanding more about your environment, building that context, your memories, and then performing that work, I think that is something where we really set ourselves apart. Like you could use AI to build a better scanner, use AI to build a custom kind of triaging workflow, but nothing is really going to understand your environment better than Nullify because of the context that it has involved. In fact, it's really quite scary, I would say. Like if you look at a lot of the tools we've built to kind of help our FDEs do work in customer environments, when we gave Nullify access to those tools and Nullify was just using it, it was like Nullify operating itself. Like it's very, very, it's very scary. Like how how well it understands the customer's environment and how well it understands all the different pieces of the puzzle. So that's kind of would be my response. It would take some time to build the level of detail, the level of memory that we have tooling and like constructs to understand.
Yeah, that resonates. And I think another thing that a lot of people who are not in it day to day underestimate is how much value there is in your deployment motion, your go to market motion as well, of not only delivering the tool, but making sure it's utilized the right way. So, completely by that. The last question I have for you, Sean, is we're sitting here, call it 2, 3 years from now. What is your ideal vision for where Nullify is, how customers are utilizing it, and how it redefines the end-to-end workflow?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see in a world where everybody's using Nullify to run their product security program. What else? Like, what other classes or higher classes of problems they're able to solve in their security teams that they weren't previously able to. Right? I think it's going to collapse a lot of the work that they do in running the program. Maybe even some of the work that bug bounty program does for them. Like, I think Nullify can submit a lot of the bugs that bug hunters might be able to find, maybe even internal red team. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to see, like, with all this time given back, all these dollars given back, what they're going to be able to do. And I think it's going to be necessary because I think the biggest new threat surface that I think security teams should be focusing on, not just the expansion of their software, but is really their use and consumption of agents. So, agentic NHI or non-human identities was the focus of the RSA conference last week. I think they're going to need that time back to focus on those things, right? Not so much in the products that they are procuring, um, but more so in the agentic logic that they're building into their applications that their consumers or their customers are consuming. So, like, are your agents behaving? Are they doing the things that they're meant to do? How are you giving your customers the confidence that your agents have the right guardrails? I think if we can solve this problem in product security, which I think we can and we have, it's going to free them up to focus on those kind of newer classes of security problems. Because at the end of the day, I think of security as a very, very simple premise, right? It's a kind of pursuit of making systems do what they're meant to do, nothing more and nothing less, right? So it's very much about correctness. The original kind of definition of security was very focused on correctness. And so now correctness in a world where, like, agents can do anything, they can make determinations without even understanding why they did something, where they're doing it, they're going to need that time back to go to focus on those things. And so if we, in 2 or 3 years, have enabled them to do that by just kind of automating out 4 or 5 tools and, 60 to 80% of one or two people's job, I think I'd be very happy.
Sean, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Nick. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That was an interesting discussion. My biggest takeaway from this conversation is that Nullify is making 3 connected bets. The first is that the model itself is not the company. Nullify is betting that the frontier model providers will keep getting better and that the real product advantage comes from the harness around the model, the context, memory, tooling, and workflow layer that lets the model operate inside a specific customer context. That shows up most clearly in Vault. Vault gives the AI a deep understanding of the customer's codebase, cloud infra, risk framework, internal docs, tickets, messaging, and the way that the company actually makes security decisions. In other words, Nullify is not trying to win by having a better generic model. It's trying to win by making the model useful in a very specific enterprise context. The second theme is that this strategy lets them deliver end-to-end workflows, not just AI-generated outputs. Nullify is not only finding vulnerabilities, it is triaging them, validating exploitability, creating the fix, opening the pull request, following up in Slack, and then measuring itself on whether the fix was actually merge ready or not. That changes the bar for evaluating the product. The question is not, did the AI produce something? The question is, did it complete the work that a human security engineer otherwise would have had to do? And that leads to the third theme, pricing. Because Nullify is replacing more of the actual work, Sean is describing pricing less like traditional SaaS and more against labor or operating expense. The buyer is not just comparing seats or usage, they're asking how much security team capacity this replaces. So to me, Nullify is a strong example of where applied AI is headed, context-rich systems, executing complete workflows, and being measured against real labor outcomes. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next week.